welcome to the Goose One channel. I'm working on a few pretty big videos right now, so to fill the space between those and my last video, I wanted to make this video to talk about something smaller in a shorter time frame, and it's about Homestuck. And more specifically about how Homestuck uses meta-narratives and the fourth wall. Let's not waste any more time and just get started, shall we? If you've spent any time on internet media analysis spaces or read Homestuck, you know what the fourth wall is, but I'll give a brief rundown for those that may have forgotten. Somehow. Breaking the fourth wall refers to when a story transcends the bounds of its fictional world in some way and acknowledges the fact that it's fictional. Notable examples would include characters talking directly to the camera like Deadpool or Ferris Bueller in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Homestuck as a comic takes advantage of the fourth wall from the very start. From the first panel, the story already directly addresses us, the readers, giving us the power of naming our main character. This fact is an interesting quirk of early Homestuck before the suggestion box was removed. From the start, up until a certain point, the story was run mostly by a publicly accessible suggestion box. Due to this, Homestuck starts incredibly meta. It breaks the fourth wall from the start and continually makes references to itself and how it's a work of fiction. Hell, Andrew Hussie makes regular appearances in the comic itself. However, in the early game, a lot of this fourth wall breaking is played off as a joke, because at the beginning, Homestuck isn't really that much of a serious story. It's just kind of people in a forum ordering around John to do whatever the fuck. Yet, as we all know, Homestuck turns into a lot more of a, well, not per se serious story, but it definitely turns into more of a story over time. But this broken fourth wall is still there. All these jokes and references and addressing the audience directly have made it very clear that Homestuck knows what it is, and that story actually transcends the bounds of its world. And as a writer, it can be very hard to structure a story in a world like that. So, let's take a look at how Homestuck manages that.
John, Egbert, Rosalind, descend, rise up, Scunch, Jade, Harley, Dave Strider, they all play Spurvin and
So, there are a few ways to handle a story like Homestuck post fourth wall breaks. First, I want to talk about what I would personally do as a writer. The best course of action would probably be to not ignore the fourth wall breaks per se, but roll with them without necessarily elaborating on them. The story is just meta in a few ways. I talk directly to the reader at times, characters would acknowledge their fictitiousness, that kind of stuff. But that's kind of where it would end. Homestuck is off the fucking wall, however, and Hussie is crazy. Throughout the course of Homestuck, we not only get more and more mentions and nods to the fourth wall, the story directly acknowledges its existence, but more importantly, Homestuck directly makes things like the fourth wall and things outside of canon a focal part of its story. Let's look at a few examples. One of the best early examples of this phenomenon in Homestuck is the one, the only, Doc Scratch. We are introduced to Scratch about 1/4 of the way into the comic during the Hive Bend arc. At this point, we get a few small glimpses of his true power, like how he guides Vriska with some ulterior knowledge we don't know about, and how he's inexplicably tied to the white cue ball she uses to make decisions, but at this point, we don't really have a clear idea of what his power set is. That is, until we have to go to him for repairs. When Terezi scratches Homestuck's second disc, the comic gradually becomes more glitchy to the point of unplayability, and we're forced to consult Scratch, who offers to repair the damage before the scratch happens and tell the story while the disc is repaired. During this moment in the story, we discover a few things. Firstly, he's a lot more powerful than we might have initially thought. We learn that he is some type of omniscience, having the knowledge of what can, will, and should happen in the story, but he, as a character, directly addresses the reader, and then he gets into a scuffle with Andrew Hussie. You know, the author of Homestuck, who at multiple points chimes in to give us a summary of past events, just shows up in the story to directly affect what's happening. I want to remind you, this isn't the first time the story directly addresses the reader, or breaks the fourth wall, but to me, it's one of the best examples of what I'm trying to get at, and also one of the most memorable fourth wall breaks. And from a writing perspective, it opens so many doors, because you can now have characters outside of canon, characters with control of their story, characters interacting with the writers, all-knowing narrators that aren't just a voice but actually turn out to be characters. Homestuck took its silly fourth wall breaks and said, fuck it, let's see how far we can take this. And I love it for that. There's obviously more examples I could go over, like the Homestuck segments later on in the comic, the concept of beyond canon in Homestuck 2, but I don't really see a point in doing that. Not right now, at least. So let's just move on, alright? I don't really have a clever closing thesis for this video. I came into this video not with a question I wanted an answer to, but with a topic I wanted to explore: how Homestuck from a writing perspective uses metafictionality and fourth wall. Although there's a bit of a conclusion to pull from this, I guess, Homestuck is really a story that tests the limits of its fourth wall. It's probably the story that goes the furthest with it that I've ever experienced, and it's one of the reasons why I love it so much. Because of this, you get some really interesting world building that's only possible because of how Homestuck embraces its fictionality and just goes all out. And you know, as a writer myself, that's so cool to see. A story that's so unbound from writing conventions in every single way and just continues to make whatever decision it wants to make. And I'm not saying all of those decisions were great, or even good for that matter, but it's inspiring to see how you can write something people love without tethering yourself to conventions. Recently, I've noticed how much my writing is influenced by the fiction that I love. Life is Strange, Undertale, both of these stories have had massive influence on my writing and my art, and I just know Homestuck will bear its roots as well. So I thought it might be interesting to look at which parts of Homestuck really interested me in that way, maybe predict what might subconsciously influence me. Anyway, before I ramble even more, I hope you enjoyed this video. See y'all later.